The lobby of the Grand Sterling Hotel was a place that seemed to breathe silence. It wasn't an empty silence, but a full one, heavy with the weight of money and good manners. The floor was made of huge white marble tiles, polished so brightly that you could see the wobbly reflection of the giant crystal chandelier hanging from the high ceiling above. The light from the chandelier splintered into 1,000 tiny rainbows that danced on the gold-leafed edges of the pillars and the dark, shiny wood of the reception desk. The air itself felt different here, cool and carrying a faint, clean smell of lemon polish and expensive flowers that sat in a large vase on a round table in the center of the room. Plush, velvet chairs in a deep red color were arranged in small, neat groups, as if waiting for important people to come and have important, quiet conversations. In this world of hushed tones and soft footsteps, every sound seemed to matter. The gentle tap of a pen on a counter, the soft swoosh of the automatic doors, the distant hum of an elevator, these were the only approved noises, and then there was the piano. It was a grand piano, big and black and gleaming under the chandelier's light. It sat proudly in a corner of the lobby, not touching the wall, but standing alone like a piece of art. It looked powerful and a little bit lonely. Its lid propped open just enough to show off the tight, shiny strings inside, waiting for someone to bring them to life. It was more for decoration than for music, a beautiful symbol of the hotel's class and sophistication. Most days it just sat there, a silent, elegant statue, but today it had a visitor. A young boy, maybe 11 or 12 years old, had found his way to the piano bench. He wasn't a guest who belonged in this world of polished perfection. His clothes were simple, a clean t-shirt and jeans that were a little bit worn at the knees. His hair was a bit messy, as if he'd been running his hands through it. He was just a boy, waiting for his parents who were busy at the front desk, sorting out their room. But while he waited, the piano had called to him. It was like a magnet, and he was a small piece of metal. Helpless to resist its pull, he sat on the bench, his feet barely touching the floor. He didn't bang on the keys or try to play a loud, attention-grabbing song. Instead, he was having a quiet, secret conversation with the instrument. His fingers, small and a little clumsy-looking, would drift over the ivory keys. He would press one down, gently, and listen to the single, clear note that would float up into the high ceiling and then fade away. He would press another, a little higher, then a lower one, listening to how they sounded together. It wasn't a song anyone would recognize. It was a melody of curiosity, a soft, wandering tune that was full of wonder. He was exploring, touching the keys as if they were something precious, feeling the vibration travel up through the wooden bench and into his bones. His head was tilted slightly, his eyes half closed in concentration. He was in his own world, a world made of wood and wire and music, completely unaware of the grand, silent lobby around him. To him, there was only him and the piano. Watching over this world, like a hawk circling a field, was the hotel manager. He was a man in his late 40s, with a face that seemed to be permanently set in a firm, unsmiling line. His suit was a dark gray, perfectly tailored, and so crisp it looked like it could stand up by itself. His shoes were black and so highly polished that they didn't just reflect the light, they seemed to challenge it. He walked through the lobby not like he was heading somewhere, but like he was on patrol. His eyes, sharp and critical, scanned everything, making sure every detail was in its proper place. Every chair had to be straight. Every surface had to be dust-free. Every guest had to behave in a way that fit the hotel's image of quiet dignity. He was the guardian of this silence, and he took his job very, very seriously. He had just finished checking on the arrangement of the flowers when his eyes landed on the piano. And on the boy. He stopped walking. For a moment he just stood there, his hands clasped behind his back, watching. He saw the boy's simple clothes, his messy hair. He saw the way the boy's fingers moved slowly over the keys, not playing a real song, just plinking. A small, tight frown formed on the manager's face. This was not right. This was not part of the picture. The piano was a symbol of elegance, not a toy for a bored child. What if he started playing loudly? What if he broke a string? What if other guests saw him and thought it was okay to treat the hotel like their own personal playroom? In the manager's mind, this small, quiet boy was a threat. He was a crack in the perfect, polished surface of the Grand Sterling Hotel. With a quiet sigh of annoyance, the manager began to walk towards the piano. His shoes, which had been making soft, muffled sounds on the carpet, now began to make a sharp, clacking sound on the marble around the piano. It was a deliberate sound, a sound that said, "I am here. I am in charge?" The boy, lost in his world of quiet notes, didn't hear him at first. The manager got closer and closer, his shadow growing longer and falling over the boy and the keyboard. The sudden darkness made the boy look up. His fingers stopped mid-air, and the last gentle note he had played faded into silence. He saw the stern man standing over him, and his small shoulders tensed up. A look of confusion and a little bit of fear crossed his face. The manager looked down at the boy, a condescending smile touching the corners of his mouth. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile a grown-up gives a child when they are about to say something they think is very clever and very important. He made sure his voice was loud enough for the couple sitting in the nearby velvet chairs to hear. "I don't think we need a concert just yet, young man," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. The boy flinched as if the words were physical things, little stones being thrown at him. He looked from the manager's cold eyes to his parents, who were still at the desk, their backs turned. He was on his own. The manager gestured with a sharp flick of his hand towards the front desk. "That piano is for decoration, not for practice," he continued, putting extra emphasis on the word practice as if it were something dirty. He paused, enjoying the power he had in this moment, enjoying the way the boy's cheeks were starting to turn red with embarrassment. Then he delivered the final blow. "Why don't you save the chopsticks for the school talent show?" He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound that echoed in the sudden quiet of the lobby. The couple in the chairs looked over, their expressions a mix of pity and awkward amusement. The boy's face was now bright red. He felt hot and small, and he wished the floor would open up and swallow him. He quickly slid his hands off the keys and started to slide off the bench, his moment of quiet exploration completely shattered. He just wanted to disappear. The boy's bottom had just left the polished wood of the piano bench when the world seemed to hold its breath. The heat in his cheeks felt like a fire, and he wished he could sink right through the marble floor and disappear into the cool, dark earth below. Every eye in the lobby felt like a tiny, sharp needle pricking at his skin. He could feel the weight of the manager's smug stare on the back of his neck, a heavy, triumphant pressure. He kept his head down, his messy hair falling over his eyes, creating a small, dark curtain between him and the world. He just wanted to get back to his parents, to grab his mother's hand, and to pretend this whole awful moment had never happened. His feet shuffled forward, one step at a time, each one feeling heavier than the last. The silence in the lobby was no longer peaceful and expensive. It was thick and sticky, full of unspoken judgment. It was the silence of people who had just watched a small, helpless creature get swatted away, but then something inside him shifted. It was a tiny, almost invisible thing, like a single spark in a dark room. It was a feeling that rose up from deep in his chest, a feeling that said, "No." It wasn't a loud shout, but a quiet, firm whisper. He thought about all the hours he had spent in his small room at home, his fingers moving over the worn keys of his second-hand upright piano. He thought about the way his teacher would nod slowly, a rare smile on her face when he finally got a difficult passage right. He thought about how the music was the one place where he felt big, where he felt strong, where he felt like himself. This man, this stranger in a stiff suit, had tried to take that away. He had tried to shrink him down to nothing, to turn his passion into a joke, to turn his quiet exploration into an act of foolishness. And in that moment, the boy decided he wouldn't let him. He stopped walking. His feet were glued to the spot, just a foot away from the piano bench. The manager, seeing him pause, let out another soft, dismissive chuckle, probably thinking the boy was just too scared to move. But the boy wasn't scared anymore. A different feeling was bubbling up inside him, a hot, fizzy feeling, like a soda bottle that had been shaken too hard. It was a mix of anger and pride and a fierce, burning need to prove the man wrong. He wasn't doing this for the people watching. He wasn't doing it to show off. He was doing it for the boy who was just told his passion was a joke. He was doing it for the music itself. Slowly, deliberately, he turned around. The movement was so unexpected that the manager's chuckle caught in his throat. The boy looked at the piano, not as a beautiful piece of furniture, but as an old friend. He looked at the keys, no longer seeing them as something to be timid with, but as something to be commanded. He slid back onto the bench, his posture completely different from before. His back was straight. His shoulders were square. He lifted his hands and held them over the keys, not hovering hesitantly, but poised and ready, like a runner at the starting line. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the cool, lemon-scented air, and then he let his fingers fall. The sound that exploded from the piano was not a gentle, wandering melody. It was a declaration. The first chord was so loud and so full that it seemed to physically push the air in the lobby, making the crystal chandelier tremble slightly. It was a sound that was full of anger and confidence, a sound that grabbed everyone's attention and refused to let go. The couple in the red velvet chairs jumped in their seats. The receptionist, who had been politely smiling at a guest, dropped her pen. The manager's face, which had been a mask of smug superiority, went completely blank. His jaw went slack and his eyes widened in disbelief. The boy didn't stop. That first chord was just the beginning. His fingers, which had seemed so small and clumsy just moments before, now moved with a speed and precision that was breathtaking. They danced across the keys, a blur of motion, pulling out a torrent of notes that tumbled over each other like a cascading waterfall. The music was complicated and fast, full of thundering low notes and sparkling, high-pitched runs that seemed to chase each other up and down the keyboard. It was a storm of sound, a hurricane of emotion, and it was coming from this small boy in the simple t-shirt. The entire lobby was transformed. The awkward, judgmental silence was shattered, replaced by a stunned, awe-filled silence. People who had been walking towards the elevator stopped in their tracks. A bellman who was about to help a guest with luggage froze, his hands still on the handle of the cart. Everyone was captivated, their eyes locked on the boy at the piano. The music was so powerful, so full of life and passion, that it seemed to create a force field around him, making him the center of the universe. His parents, finally finished with their check-in, turned around, drawn by the incredible sound. They saw their son, their quiet, sometimes shy son, sitting at the grand piano, his body swaying slightly with the music, his face a mask of intense concentration. They saw the crowd that had gathered, the looks of shock and wonder on their faces, and they stood there, frozen, their hearts swelling with a mixture of pride and utter confusion. The boy was lost in the music. He wasn't thinking about the manager anymore, or the people watching. He was just feeling. The anger he had felt was pouring out of him through the keys, but there was something else there, too. There was a deep, aching sadness and a soaring, powerful joy. The music was his voice, telling a story that words could never express. It was the story of being underestimated, of being judged, of being small. And it was also the story of finding your own power, of standing up and shouting without making a sound. His fingers flew, pressing one key after another, each note perfect, each phrase full of meaning. He was no longer just a boy playing a piano. He was a storyteller, a poet, a master of his craft. And in the middle of the gilded, silent lobby, he was having the last word. The manager could only stand there, his face pale, the sound of the boy's glorious, defiant music washing over him, drowning him in a sea of regret. The music that poured from the grand piano was not just sound. It was a living, breathing thing that filled every corner of the lobby. It snaked around the marble pillars and danced in the crystal drops of the chandelier. The boy, who had seemed so small in moments ago, was now the conductor of this magnificent storm. His body moved with the music, swaying forward as the melody grew more intense, then leaning back as it softened into a whisper. His eyes were closed, his face a canvas of emotion, his brow furrowed in concentration one moment, then relaxing into a look of pure, unadulterated joy the next. He was no longer just a boy playing an instrument. He was a channel for something powerful and ancient, something that spoke a universal language everyone in the room could understand. Even if they couldn't name the notes or the composer, The manager stood frozen, a statue carved from ice. His carefully constructed world of order and quiet sophistication had been blown apart by this hurricane of sound. His mind, which was usually a tidy file cabinet of rules and procedures, was now a chaotic mess. He kept trying to process what was happening, but his thoughts kept getting swept away by the waves of music. "This is the same boy," he thought, his internal voice a panicked whisper. Asterisk, the same boy who was plinking out a simple tune. "This is impossible." Asterisk, he looked at the boy's fingers, a blur of motion on the black and white keys. They moved with a speed and strength that seemed to defy the laws of physics. He saw the tendons in the boy's forearms, tight and defined like steel cables. He saw the sweat beading on the boy's upper lip, a sign of the immense physical and mental effort this performance required. The manager felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He had not just been wrong. He had been catastrophically, embarrassingly wrong. He had mocked a master, and now that master was holding the entire room captive with his art, the music began to change. The initial thunderous assault of notes softened, transforming into a melody that was as delicate and intricate as a spider's web glistening with morning dew. The high notes were like tiny bells, ringing clearly and sweetly, while the left hand played a gentle, rolling accompaniment that was like the quiet lapping of waves on a shore. This new part of the music was full of a deep, aching sadness. It spoke of loneliness, of longing, of a quiet hope that was always just out of reach. An elderly woman sitting in one of the velvet chairs, who had been watching with a critical eye, now brought a handkerchief to her cheek, dabbing away a tear. She was a piano teacher herself, and she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that she was listening to a once-in-a-generation talent. This wasn't just good playing. It was a revelation. The boy wasn't just hitting the right notes. He was breathing life into them, pouring his soul into every single one. The boy's parents stood near the front desk, their bags forgotten at their feet. They exchanged a wide-eyed, bewildered look. They knew their son loved the piano. They knew he practiced for hours every day in their small living room. They had heard him play beautiful things before. But this was something else entirely. This was a side of him they had never seen. It was as if they were looking at their son for the first time, seeing a depth and a passion in him that was both thrilling and a little bit scary. His mother's heart swelled with a fierce, protective pride, while his father felt a lump form in his throat, a mixture of awe and a strange sense of guilt for not realizing the full extent of his son's gift. They saw the people staring, the phones coming out to record, and a flicker of worry passed between them. This was a moment that was too big, too powerful for a hotel lobby. It was a moment for a grand concert hall, not a place where people checked in and out. As the sad melody reached its peak, the music shifted again. A new theme began to emerge from the quiet sorrow, a theme that was full of strength and growing hope. It started small, just a few notes in the middle of the keyboard, but it grew louder and more insistent, climbing higher and higher like a vine reaching for the sun. The boy's body began to rock more forcefully, his whole being now invested in this musical climb. The tempo began to speed up, the gentle waves of the left hand becoming a powerful current, pulling the melody forward with an unstoppable force. The complexity was staggering, with different musical voices weaving in and out of each other, having a complex, passionate conversation. It was a musical argument and a reconciliation all at once. A businessman who had been waiting impatiently for the elevator, his arms crossed and his foot tapping, now found himself completely mesmerized. His impatience had vanished, replaced by a sense of wonder. He had come to the hotel for a meeting, to talk about numbers and contracts, but this was more real, more important than any of that. The manager felt the eyes of the guests on him. He could feel their silent judgment, their collective disapproval of his earlier cruelty. He wanted to turn and walk away, to hide in his office, but he was paralyzed. He was rooted to the spot, forced to witness the consequences of his arrogance. He remembered the condescending tone in his voice, the smug smile on his face, the cruel words he had used to belittle the boy. "Save the chopsticks for the school talent show," he had said. The memory now felt like a hot iron branding his brain. He imagined the video of this moment going viral, his face, pale and shocked, next to the title Manager Mocks Piano Prodigy. He saw his career, his reputation, everything he had worked for, crumbling in an instant. The music was no longer just beautiful. It was an accusation. Every powerful chord was a reminder of his mistake. Every soaring melody was a testament to the spirit he had tried to crush. The performance was building towards its final, breathtaking conclusion. The boy's fingers were flying across the keys, a whirlwind of motion and sound. The music was a torrent, a flood of emotion that was almost too much to bear. It was angry and joyful, sad and triumphant, all at the same time. The entire lobby was holding its breath, caught up in the sheer force of it all. Then, with a final, dramatic flourish of his hands, the boy brought them down on the keys, striking a massive, resonant chord that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. The sound was huge, a final, definitive statement that filled every inch of the space. And then silence, but it wasn't an empty silence. It was a thick, heavy, vibrating silence, packed with the ghost of the music that had just filled it. The final chord seemed to hang in the air, echoing for a long time after the strings had stopped vibrating. No one moved. No one spoke. The boy sat with his hands still on the keys, his chest rising and falling with deep, ragged breaths, his head bowed. The world seemed to stop, waiting for what would come next. The manager stood in the middle of it all, his face ashen, the weight of his regret pressing down on him like a physical force. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the world had just shifted on its axis, and he was standing on the wrong side of the fault line. The final, thunderous chord seemed to suck all the air out of the room, leaving a vacuum of pure, vibrating silence. It was a heavy, profound silence, not the quiet, polite one the manager so desperately craved. This silence was full of the ghost of the music, full of the shock and awe of the people who had witnessed it. The boy sat at the piano, his hands still resting on the keys as if they were glued there. His head was bowed, his chest rising and falling with deep, shuddering breaths. He was completely spent, a small, drained battery after a massive surge of power. A single drop of sweat traced a path down his temple and hung from his jaw, shimmering under the chandelier's light before falling onto the polished wood of the piano, for what felt like an eternity. No one moved. The bellman was still frozen, his mouth slightly agape. The businessman had forgotten all about his meeting, his phone still in his pocket, untouched. The boy's parents stood as if rooted to the marble floor, their faces a mixture of overwhelming pride, confusion, and a dawning sense of wonder. They were looking at their son, but they were seeing a stranger, a young man possessed by an extraordinary and breathtaking force. And in the middle of it all stood the manager, his face a pale, bloodless mask. His carefully constructed world had been not just shaken, but completely demolished, and he was standing in the ruins. The silence was finally broken by a single, sharp sound. Clap. It was a loud, decisive clap that echoed in the vast space. Every head turned towards the sound. It came from the elderly woman in the deep red velvet chair. She was slowly getting to her feet, her movements slow but deliberate. She brought her hands together again, clap, clap, a steady, rhythmic sound that was full of conviction. It wasn't tentative applause. It was a judgment, a verdict. Her single act was a spark that lit a bonfire. Another person started clapping, then another. Soon a ripple of applause turned into a wave. The sound grew and grew, filling the lobby with a roar of approval that was even louder than the music had been. It was a rapturous, thundering ovation, a release of all the tension and emotion that had been building in the room. People were on their feet, cheering, whistling, their faces alight with joy and admiration. The boy looked up, his eyes wide with surprise, as if he couldn't quite believe what was happening. He saw the faces all turned towards him, all smiling, all applauding him. A slow, shy smile spread across his own face, a look of pure, unadulterated happiness that lit up the entire room. Through the crowd, the elderly woman began to walk towards the piano. The other guests, sensing her purpose, parted to let her pass. She moved with a simple elegance, her eyes fixed on the boy. She stopped a few feet from him, her own expression one of deep emotional respect. "Incredible," she said, her voice soft but clear, cutting through the fading applause. "Absolutely incredible." She looked at the boy, not as a child, but as an equal, as a fellow artist. "You don't just play the notes," she continued, her voice thick with emotion. "You tell the story. You feel every single part of it. Thank you for sharing that with us." The boy just nodded, not trusting himself to speak. His mother finally broke free from her stupor and rushed to his side, putting a protective arm around his shoulders. His father followed, standing behind them, his hand resting on his son's head, a gesture of pride and support. Then the elderly woman turned. Her gaze shifted from the boy and his parents to the ashen-faced manager who was still standing nearby, looking like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. Her expression changed. The warmth in her eyes was replaced by a cool, piercing clarity. "And you," she said, her voice losing its softness and taking on a sharp, unforgiving edge. "You were about to silence one of the most gifted young pianists I have ever heard." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her quiet, direct words were more cutting than any shout could have been. You were about to crush a spirit like that because it didn't fit into your neat little box of what is proper. That is not just a failure of judgment. It is a failure of humanity. The manager flinched as if he had been struck. He opened his mouth to say something, to apologize, to explain, but no words came out. His throat was dry and his tongue felt like a thick, useless piece of cloth. He could only stand there, taking the verbal blows, each one perfectly aimed and utterly deserved. He saw the way the boy's mother pulled him closer, giving the manager a look of cold fury. He saw the way the other guests were now looking at him, their admiration for the boy curdling into contempt for him. He was no longer the authority figure in the room. He was a pariah. The woman, having delivered her verdict, turned her back on him, dismissing him completely. She focused her attention back on the boy, her expression softening once more. "My dear," she said, her voice gentle again, "my name is not important, but what I do is. I help organize and sponsor a very prestigious music festival for young musicians from all over the world." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. The boy and his parents stared at her, their eyes wide with disbelief. "I have been searching for a true prodigy, someone with real fire and soul, for years. I have found hundreds of very good players, but I have not found a true artist. Until today." She smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached her eyes. "I would be honored if you would consider being our guest performer at this year's festival. All expenses paid, of course. We would be thrilled to have you." The boy's mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. His father put his other hand on his son's shoulder, as if to steady himself. This was not just applause. This was a dream, an impossible, life-altering opportunity falling out of the sky and landing right at their feet. The boy, for his part, just looked at the woman, his eyes shining with tears of gratitude and disbelief. The manager watched this entire exchange, a silent, invisible spectator to a life-changing moment. He saw the woman hand a card to the boy's father. He saw the father's hand trembling as he took it. He saw the hope and joy dawning on their faces. And with every passing second, the cold knot of regret in his stomach grew tighter and colder until it felt like a block of ice. He had not just been rude to a guest. He had not just made a bad call. He had almost extinguished a light that was meant to shine on the world's biggest stages. He had tried to snuff out a masterpiece before it was even finished. And now he was forced to stand by and watch as someone else picked up the pieces and offered that masterpiece to the world. The regret was no longer just a feeling. It was a physical presence, a crushing weight that pressed down on his shoulders, making him feel smaller and more insignificant than he had ever felt in his life. The boy's father held the small, crisp card in his hand as if it were a fragile, ancient artifact. His knuckles were white, and his eyes were fixed on the elegant, raised lettering as if trying to decipher a secret code. The mother, with one arm still wrapped tightly around her son's shoulders, used her other hand to gently touch the card, her fingers tracing the edge. It was real. This was really happening. The boy, still catching his breath, looked from the card to the kind, smiling face of the elderly woman, then back to his parents. The world felt like it was spinning, a dizzying whirlwind of applause, shock, and a bright, blinding hope that he had never dared to feel before. The manager, seeing a small opening in the emotional storm, took a hesitant step forward. His throat felt like it was full of sand, but he knew he had to say something. He had to try. I'm so sorry, he stammered, his voice a dry, raspy whisper that was nothing like the firm, commanding tone he had used just minutes before. I had no idea. I was completely out of line. Please accept my most sincere apologies. He directed his words to the boy's parents, but he couldn't bring himself to look at the boy. His gaze was fixed on a spot on the marble floor, a spot that suddenly seemed incredibly interesting. The father slowly lifted his head. He looked at the manager, and there was no anger in his eyes, no fury. There was something worse. There was a look of profound disappointment, a quiet, steady dismissal that was more cutting than any shout could ever be. He didn't say a word. He simply gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head, then turned his attention back to his son and the woman, placing a protective hand on the boy's back. The mother didn't even look at the manager. It was as if he had become invisible, a piece of furniture, insignificant and ignored. The silence that followed his apology was heavier and more damning than any response could have been. He had been erased from their moment. The elderly woman gave the manager one last cool glance, a look that said his words were too little, too late. Then she turned her full attention back to the family. Come, she said gently, gesturing towards the hotel's lounge. Let's go somewhere more comfortable where we can talk. This calls for a celebration, and I find I am suddenly very thirsty. She began to lead them away. The boy's parents following in a daze, their son walking between them. His small hand now holding his mother's dot as they walked away, the lobby seemed to breathe again. The other guests, who had been holding their breath watching the drama unfold, began to disperse. They spoke in hushed, excited whispers, glancing back at the piano and then at the manager, who now stood alone in the center of the room. He was an island in a sea of murmuring conversations and soft footsteps. The spell was broken. The magic was gone. All that was left was him, and the crushing weight of what he had done. He watched them go, the small family, following the kind stranger towards a new, brighter future. He saw the boy look back over his shoulder, just for a second, their eyes meeting for a brief moment. There was no triumph in the boy's gaze, no smugness. There was just a quiet, simple understanding. And then he was gone, disappearing into the plush comfort of the lounge. The manager was left alone in the grand, silent lobby. The silence that he had always prized, that he had worked so hard to protect, was now his enemy. It was no longer a peaceful, empty space. It was a loud, echoing chamber of his own shame. Every creak of the building, every distant hum of an elevator seemed to mock him. He slowly walked over to the piano. It stood there, just as it had before, a beautiful, gleaming instrument. But now it looked different. It was no longer just a piece of decoration. It was a monument to a moment of breathtaking beauty and to his own moment of breathtaking foolishness. He reached out a trembling hand and let his fingers rest on the cool, smooth surface of the keys. He pressed one down gently. A single, clear note rang out, a lonely sound in the vast, empty space. It was nothing. It was just a sound. It had no soul, no story, no life. He could feel the vibration in his fingertips, a faint echo of the incredible storm that had raged here just moments ago. He thought about the boy, the way his body had moved with the music, the look of pure concentration on his face. He had seen a passion so pure, so powerful, that it had scared him. It had been messy and unpredictable, and it didn't fit into his neat, orderly world. So he had tried to crush it. The regret was no longer just a cold knot in his stomach. It was a physical pain, a deep ache in his chest. He thought about his own life. He thought about the years he had spent here, in this lobby, making sure everything was perfect. Making sure everything was just so? He had thought that was success. He had thought that control was power. But watching that boy play, he had seen a different kind of power. A power that came from letting go, from feeling deeply, from being vulnerable. He had spent his life building walls of rules and expectations, and in just a few minutes, a small boy with a gift had torn them all down. He looked around the lobby. At the polished marble, the gilded pillars, the crystal chandelier. It all seemed so hollow now. It was a beautiful, empty shell. The real life, the real beauty, had been the thing he had tried to get rid of. He had been so focused on the picture that he had forgotten about the soul. He sank onto the piano bench, the same bench the boy had sat on. It was still warm. He sat there for a long time, just staring at the keys, his shoulders slumped in defeat. He was the manager of the Grand Sterling Hotel, a man of importance and authority, but he had never felt so small, so utterly insignificant in his entire life. The silence of the lobby pressed in on him, no longer a sign of a well-run hotel, but a reminder of a priceless opportunity he had almost stolen from the world, and a lesson he had learned in the most public and humiliating way possible.